The whisper was a breath of ice against my ear. "Don't get on the church bus today, Eleanor." Martha's voice was almost swallowed by the January wind, but it landed like a stone. Mist hung low over the parking lot, the kind of Minnesota fog that smells faintly of old snow and diesel. My fingers went to the little gold cross I always wear, and I felt the familiar weight against my palm, the smoothness of the brooch, the tiny nick Howard left when he fastened it years ago. Steadied me for a second. Pastor Gregory was there, the new bus behind him puffing warm air. He was smiling in that practiced way, handing a blanket to Ruth Jenkins and straightening the collar of Diacono Phillips. His voice carried charismatic ringing. Yet when his eyes met mine, the smile didn't reach them. There was a coolness there like the underside of ice. I felt it in my bones. I've been at First Baptist of Oak Ridge for 47 years. This building knows the shape of my life. My husband's hammer marks are still in the annex beams. I know each hymn in the battered hymnal and every step up to the pulpit like they're stitched into my feet. But 6 months ago everything shifted when Pastor Wilson retired and Gregory came in with promises. He brought youth outreach and handsome words, and the church leaned into him hungry. I wanted to lean back with him, but something in me resisted. Martha's hand tightened on my wrist. Her grip is firm even at 71, teacher's hands practical, organized. Her coat smelled of lavender and car wax. She glanced back at the bus, then at me. "Trust me," she said. Her eyes were steady. "Not today." "Why?" I heard myself ask. It was more than curiosity. It was the sound of someone trying to balance faith and fear. She didn't answer at once. She laced her fingers through mine, pulled me toward her Ford. The engine coughed to life and the heater breathed warm, dusty air into the cab. Martha always keeps her things neat, her glasses case, a cloth for the dashboard, a stack of folders tied with rubber bands. When she pulled one loose, the paper made a thin, nervous rustle that sounded too loud against the quiet morning. "I found things," she said finally, voice low, as if the sound could wake the dead. Little lines on statements. Transfers. Names I didn't recognize. The bus maintenance records. They don't add up. She slid a page across my lap. The print blurred at first. Numbers, corporate names with my churches on the letterhead. There were receipts stamped with dates, signatures in a handwriting that could almost belong to Gregory. My breath came shallow. The cross warmed under my hand. I rubbed it like a nervous little child. "Are you sure?" I asked, because hope is a stubborn thing that wants to be the first explanation. My jaw worked. I caught the faint scent of oil and old coffee in Martha's folder, and somewhere in the distance the bus engine revved, a protective, oblivious sound. Martha nodded. "I'm sure." Her fingers tapped the corner of a photo showing Gregory at a ribbon cutting, arm around a man in a suit. Another image of a deed, lands bought in the church's name, but the owner listed as a private company. "He did this on purpose," she said. There was a tremor now, not of fear alone but of something like grief. We watched through the windshield as congregants climbed aboard. Ruth with her slow, careful steps, Diane fumbling with her scarf, Diacono Phillips making a small joke to hide the tremor in his hands. The bus's door thudded closed with a sound that felt like a book being shut. Pastor Gregory looked our way, caught my eye, and for a beat I considered getting on anyway. He spoke bright, almost theatrical. "Sister Eleanor, you'll miss the views." His smile was broad as a postcard. "We need your stories on the road." I felt an old reflex, a pull toward duty. "I'm not feeling well," I said, surprised at my own voice. Came out thin, a small white lie. My hands, which had been steady for decades, shook a little as I tucked the brooch under my scarf as if to hide it. "That's too bad," he said, and for a flash anger crossed his face, quick, practiced, then it melted into benevolence. He moved on, patting shoulders, barking a yes at a driver. The world resumed its polished rhythm, as if nothing had been misplaced. Martha started the truck and backed out, her boots crunching the gravel. The heater expelled a steady hum. She kept her eyes on the road but didn't drive away. "We can't let this go," she murmured, more to herself than to me. Her fingers smoothed the papers. They shivered under the heater's warm breath like flags. I clasped the brooch between thumb and forefinger until the metal felt almost soft. My heart echoed in the small space between my ribs. There was guilt, sharp, metallic, at the thought of not going with the others. There was also a small, fierce relief that something somewhere had kept me sitting still. My phone buzzed, high and frantic in my coat pocket. I fumbled for it. Diane's name flashed across the screen. Her voice came through ragged, words tripping over one another. "Eleanor." The bus. And then a gasp, a choking sound. The line cut dead like a snapped thread. The heater clicked off for a breathless second. The truck hummed, waiting. The folder lay open between us, the papers fluttering. I felt cold, though the heater tried to argue with winter. Martha's hand found mine again, and this time it didn't let go. We sat, listening to the parking lot, to the faint echo of the bus engine retreating down the road, and to the place where Diane's sentence had ended. Something had shifted, the way ice shifts underfoot before it breaks. The breath in my chest felt held, and then exhaled. We had to move. The whisper was a breath of ice against my ear. "Don't get on the church bus today, Eleanor." Martha's voice was nearly swallowed by the January wind, but it landed like a stone. Mist hung low over the parking lot. Minnesota fog that smelled faintly of old snow and diesel. My fingers closed around the little gold cross I always wear. Its familiar weight steadied me. "My dears, thank you for being here and giving me a few minutes of your day. This channel is just beginning. Each new subscriber is a small life breath that helps us grow. If this story touches you, please consider clicking subscribe. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Means more than you know." A few days before that frozen morning, my world felt ordinary in the small, steady ways that have steadied me for decades. I woke before dawn to the soft click of the old clock over the mantel. Howard wound it every Sunday when he was alive, and the kitchen smelled like coffee and lemon soap. Light filtered through the lace curtain, thin and pink with the first cold light of January, painting the table in soft stripes. I set the kettle on, slow and deliberate. The house creaked in the familiar way it always does, like a body settling into sleep. At 68, my days have a rhythm. Bible, a page or two of the daily reading, the brooch over my heart, a cup of coffee sipped from the thin blue mug Howard liked, then the walk to church when the bells ring. The bells there, First Baptist of Oak Ridge, sound like an old promise. They chime at 7 and again at noon, and somehow their steady toll keeps the town honest. I can tell you the shape of the pews by touch if I had to. I know which hymns bring men to tears and which make the choir's soprano soar. This place is stitched into me. A week earlier, I had lingered after Wednesday night prayer. The sanctuary smelled of lemon oil and wax. Mrs. Carter always polished the brass offering trays on Thursdays, and the burgundy curtain behind the pulpit hung heavy like a velvet promise. The brass cross on the altar had a little dark spot right where my fingers always brushed when I pass. It's strange how the smallest marks carry a life. There was an empty bench near the back that day. I paused and smoothed the cushion. It was where Ruth used to sit before her arthritis kept her home some Wednesdays. Even an empty bench can feel like a presence. Martha had called me that afternoon in a voice that was too careful to be casual. "Eleanor, can you come by the office? I need your opinion on something." So I went, the church lights humming above us like patient flies, the smell of copier toner and paper strong in the small office. Martha had been treasurer for years before she retired. She knows numbers the way some people know prayers. She sat at the metal table with a stack of folders, each one tidy, edges clipped with the kind of order that has comforted more than one frazzled secretary over the years. I remember the fluorescent light buzzing above us, the way it made the varnish on Howard's hammer mark look duller in the annex doorway. Martha pushed a folder across. "Look," she said. I felt something inside me shift. I thought of the new bus out in the lot, shiny, with the church's emblem painted on the side. How Pastor Gregory had stood next to it for the photo op, his hand on the ribbon. He had been so persuasive then, promising outreach and safety and a future that would bring young families back. I remembered the day he arrived at the church, how we listened to his sermons and leaned forward for every word. But seeing ink on a page is different from hearing a sermon. Ink is stubborn, it leaves a trail. We talked quietly. Martha organized the papers by color. Her fingers trembled just a little when she handed me a printout of a transfer, as if the paper itself might burn her. "I couldn't sleep last night," she confessed. "I kept thinking about the children on that bus." Her voice broke in a way that made the fluorescent hum fall away. The office smelled suddenly of coffee gone cold and the lemon polish, like the world had been wiped down and a stain remained. We decided to keep it close for the moment. Not out of shame but out of caution. The church is our family, and family needs careful hands. I thought of Howard and the way he hammered a beam until it was square. Faith had always been built on steady work in our house, no grand gestures, just the slow, patient fixing of what is broken. But that night, as I walked home under the thin January moon and the church bells still echoing, I felt the shape of something else. A crack running through a foundation you thought secure. That is why, on the morning of the trip, when Martha leaned toward me in the parking lot and let the words slide out like a small stone, "Don't get on the church bus today, Eleanor," I heard more than a warning. I heard all those small things I'd held in the office, the grease stamp missing, the ledger's odd numbers, the frost on the curtain of ordinary life, collect and press against my ribs until I could not ignore them. I touched the brooch, felt Howard's nick against my thumb, and for the first time in a very long time, I let fear and love make the same decision. The whisper landed like a coin dropped into a deep well. "Don't get on the church bus today, Eleanor." Martha's voice was so low it might have been a prayer. Or a warning. The January air pressed cold against my face, the kind that finds every tendon and makes them sing. Steam rose from the bus exhaust in slow, pale ropes. The parking lot smelled of diesel and wet wool, and the faint lemon of the church custodian's polish. I felt the metal of my little gold cross under my fingertips, Howard's nick against the edge, the only small steady thing in my hand. Pastor Gregory moved among the folding chairs and bundled coats with that practiced ease of someone used to being watched. He was all smooth gestures and the right soft laugh. He handed a thermos to Ruth Jenkins like a man who had practiced gentleness. He straightened Diacono Phillips's scarf and clapped a hand on the driver's shoulder. From where I stood, his smile showed all his teeth, and his eyes remained calm and far away like a frozen pond. My palms began to dampen. There was a thin, hot knot in my throat, the kind that tightens when you try to swallow down something sharper than words. Martha's hand closed on my wrist with a pressure that kept me in place. Strong teacher's hands, the kind that could hold a ruler and a reckoning at the same time. She leaned closer until her breath fogged against my cheek. "Not today," she said again, and there was no smallness left in it now. "Please." I looked at the bus. The new one, shiny, the church emblem freshly painted. Pastor Gregory standing like the photograph that would later go in the bulletin. I could name almost everyone on that bus by the way they gathered, the way they laughed too loudly to hide a tremor. 47 years of pews and potlucks had taught me the sound of my congregation's heartbeats. Duty tugged at me the same way it had tugged when Howard needed a hand at the annex. Go with them, be present, share stories on the ride, be the one who comforts if someone needs it. Why? I asked, though I already knew some of the reasons. Martha's papers had been a small, heavy thing in her lap, ledgers and photocopies and a photograph where Pastor Gregory posed with a city official. I'd seen the ink transfers, the missing maintenance receipts. Those were small, stubborn things that don't lie. But to speak them aloud, against the man who now led our prayers, felt like unpicking a seam that had held the whole garment together. Pastor Gregory looked up then. He caught my eye. and for one sliver of a moment his practiced warmth came full force. "Sister Eleanor," he called, as if I were a character in one of his stories. "You'll miss the mountain air. We need your voice on the trip." My knees wanted to obey. I could feel the muscle memory of years of saying yes to the church, to bake pies, to sing alto, to sit with a widow till midnight. Old instincts smelled like safety. My breath came shallow. The metal of the brooch warmed under my fingers. I could feel my hands, older now, veins like blue ropes, and they trembled in a way I had not let others see. Martha's eyes met mine. There was no dramatic flair, only the steady look of a woman who had counted numbers and kept the book straight for decades. "Eleanor," she said softly, "the maintenance records are gone. The signatures are doctored. The company listed for the brake work. It's one I could not find. Transfers out the week the purchase was made." He signed them. The world narrowed to her words and the small, relentless sound of the bus heater. Everything else dimmed, except for the images in my head. Children on a winding mountain road, the bus hugging a curve, brakes that might not bite. A cold ran down my spine that had nothing to do with January. Guilt pressed at me like a heavy coat. This church was Howard's as much as mine. He'd helped lay those floorboards. He had sanded down the pew where I now sat. To question the pastor felt like betraying my own house. Yet the ledger's black lines kept pulling me back. Stubborn ink tracing a path somewhere between faith and accounting. "Go with them, Eleanor," Pastor Gregory said when he noticed my hesitation, his voice honey-sweet now. "Your stories keep this congregation together. We'll be safe. God is with us." The words were soft, weapons polished to luster. I inhaled. The air tasted of cold metal and hot coffee. My heart beat loud enough that for a second I heard only it. I remembered Howard's hands under the annex beam, the way he would pause and listen to the house settle, then go back to his work. I felt foolish for wanting to be in the right place at the right time, and terrified of being in the wrong one. Martha's fingers closed around the folder in her lap. The papers shifted, making a whisper like an old hymn. "Please," she said again. 2 little syllables, and they carried the weight of the ledger, of Ruth's slow steps, of the chorus of Sundays. I felt something loosen inside me, as if an old hinge had finally oiled itself. My voice surprised me, came small, almost apologetic. "I'm not feeling well, Pastor." The lie was pale and brittle and slid out before I could measure its cost. I felt the lie land like a pebble in a pond. The ripples had no time to smooth. His smile faltered for the briefest second, just enough for me to see the calculation behind his eyes. Then the smile returned, more practiced than before. "That's too bad," he said. "Rest, sister. We'll bring you a report." He patted my shoulder with a hand that smelled faintly of aftershave and coin. The bus door closed with a soft thud. The engine hummed, then rolled forward, tires whispering over wet gravel. Somebody laughed inside, a small nervous sound that immediately softened into a hymn tune. I watched them go, my friends, my church family, in a slow procession of waving muffled hands, scarves like little flags. Martha did not watch them leave. She started the old Ford, the heater coughing to life. She placed the folder where I could see it, open, honest, impossible to ignore. The cross warmed against my palm as if it too waited. My breath hitched. My hands were cold now, fingers numb, but something else, a thin, fierce thread, had connected me to Martha and to the papers and to whatever truth lay in the ink. I decided to stay. I couldn't have told you in that moment whether it was courage or cowardice. I only knew the sound of the bus fading down the road and the way my chest felt pressed and hollow, as if I had taken a turn and stepped away from what was expected. Martha reached across and squeezed my hand. Her grip said, "We hold this together now." And for the first time that morning, I let the brooch rest against my skin without moving it. The hospital smelled like bleach and canned coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed over rows of folding chairs where neighbors sat wrapped in blankets, hands folded or fidgeting with rosaries and knitted cuffs. There was a murmur, and then Pastor Gregory was beside us, immaculate even here. His coat felt as if it had been pressed between sermon pages. He placed a gloved hand on Ruth's shoulder as if ceremony could soothe a broken bone. "So thankful you're all right, sister," he said, his voice soft as satin. He smiled with his mouth. His eyes stayed cool and distant. I felt my breath hitch. The words rose in my throat. Accident? Negligence. But when they met his smile, they flattened. I watched him because I had looked at him so many Sundays, as if his face contained the shape of God itself. Today his face contained something else. Calculation, a practiced steadiness that did not reach his eyes. Was it an accident? The question felt small. It was a child's question rolling off a cliff. His smile didn't falter, only tightened. "We don't know everything yet, Eleanor. The police are investigating. What matters now is care." He leaned in, the movement precise. Up close the aftershave smelled faint and floral, and there was a flash of something like impatience behind his calm. Martha stepped forward like a teacher about to lay a ruler on a desk. She had that look I knew from decades of counting Sunday collections. Focused, unafraid. Her hands were steady as she opened the folder. Papers whispered against each other. She didn't speak the accusation. The pages did. For a beat the room held the sound of a single pen scratching. Someone taking notes. The pastor's hand went to his coat pocket as if to pat a Bible, and stopped. His jaw tightened. He glanced at the folder, and for the first time his smile sagged at one corner. "You shouldn't be showing those here," he said quietly, not to Martha but to the room, like a man who used to command the stage. His voice carried a veiled plea, control couched in civility. Martha looked straight at him. "These are church records," she said. "They belong to the people." Her glasses caught the light. Her voice had the flat, undeniable tone of someone who teaches facts to slow students. "There are transfers the week the bus was bought. Maintenance receipts that don't match the service dates. A company listed as having done brake work that doesn't actually exist where it's supposed to." Heads turned. A woman behind me covered her mouth with both hands. Diane, who had cut our line in the crowd to get to the phone the morning of the trip, stood now with her scarf damp, her face white. She stared at Martha's papers like a person seeing a photograph of a life that suddenly hasn't the right colors. Pastor Gregory's fingers tapped a rhythm against his thigh. He had the look men get when they are recalculating a speech. "There are explanations," he said. "Donations, grants, administrative errors." He offered reassurance like a benediction. I could feel the room shrinking around the small things. The nick on my cross, Howard's hammer mark in the annex, the way Ruth's hand sought mine. My mouth tasted like pennies. I found my voice by holding the cross between thumb and forefinger and letting it speak for me. "Those are not explanations," I said. My voice surprised me with how steady it was. "They're paper. They show movements. They show decisions made about money that was meant for safety." He looked at me as if I were an awkwardly placed him, familiar but inconvenient. "Sister Eleanor, why were the maintenance records falsified?" Martha cut in, quiet but sharp enough to draw blood. "Why were funds moved from the maintenance account to private entities? Why was the company that signed the brake work not there when we called?" Silence fell like a curtain. The same silence that had hung over Wednesday night prayer when I first saw the numbers. The pastor's hands curled, a small private thing. His face went briefly, almost imperceptibly, pale. "Accusations without proof are dangerous," he said at last. The words were smooth, but his fingers trembled once. He looked toward the nurses' station, toward the metal doors where the EMTs were speaking with officers. For a second I saw him not as a pastor but as a man deciding which story would keep him whole. An officer we'd seen earlier approached. He asked for statements, his voice businesslike but not unkind. He asked for names for times for what we'd seen. Martha handed him copies of the folder. Her hands did not shake. "We'll have to take these as part of the investigation," the officer said. "If there's evidence of fraud or falsified documents, we'll follow it." The pastor's mask slipped then. Not in a dramatic tear but a tiny mortal thing. His mouth tightened. He pulled his hand from his pocket and clenched it once, as if to hide its tremor. He looked at the faces around him, at Ruth's gentle eyes, at Diane's pallor, at the old hymnal I could see peeking from a bag, and I felt something like a breaking, not of bone but of an idea. Martha leaned closer to me and her breath smelled of peppermint and winter. "We kept the records," she whispered, not to the room but to me. "Because if we don't tend our house, who will?" I thought of Howard standing on the ladder, of the way he would pause between strokes of the hammer and listen to the house settle. I thought of every Sunday when faith felt like faith because we tended it together. Now faith felt raw like open skin. But beside the pain was a hard, clear thing. Truth must be tended too. As the officer motioned for Pastor Gregory to come aside for questions, he smiled at us like a man selling peace. It didn't reach his eyes. I watched him go, watched his shoulders set like a man stepping into a sermon he hadn't rehearsed. Martha's fingers found mine. They were warm and steady. "We did the right thing," she said simply. I let the words settle. They were both a comfort and a reckoning. I pressed the brooch until Howard's nick bit into my thumb and whispered under my breath, "Sometimes God speaks through those beside you." Outside, a wind skittered across the parking lot and lifted a discarded bulletin like a white bird. Inside, faces turned toward the officers, toward the folder, toward the thin trail where trust had gone wrong. We were a congregation rearranged, and I felt, for the first time in many Sundays, that my hands had work to do that was not polishing brass nor keeping hymnals in order, but mending, speaking, holding small, ordinary acts that keep a house from falling. After the officer left with his files and Pastor Gregory was led away for questioning, something invisible settled over First Baptist of Oak Ridge. It wasn't thunder or the weight of snow on the eaves. It was colder. It moved through the sanctuary like an uninvited draft. At first it was small things. The woman who always hugged me after the benediction, Mabel, pulled her coat closer when she crossed my path and said, "I'm so glad you're okay," in a voice that clipped off at the end like a sentence unfinished. Her hands trembled as she brushed past me, and she kept walking. I watched the curve of her back until she was at the pew and had turned away. Her face was a map of a friendship I had helped trace for decades, and for the first time I could not find the route to it. Whispers grew in the pews. You could hear them like the faint rustle of winter leaves. Two women in the choir stand leaned in too close, mouths near each other's ears. I caught fragments. Records. Martha found something. "Did you hear he?" Then eyes would flick in my direction and slide away, as if I were a hot coal they were careful not to hold. The church bulletin that Sunday was thin. Pastor Gregory's picture was gone from the staff page. His sermon notes were replaced by a blank column titled, "Prayers for Our Community." There were empty slots on the usher schedule. People who used to greet me with a calloused hand and a smile now chose doors on the other side of the vestibule. A widow I used to visit would sit farther down the bench, her hymnal between us like a shield. It wasn't only the silent treatment. There were looks that weighed like judgments, the kind that narrow the eyes and widen the distance. The deacon who always tried to make me laugh, Phillips, looked at me once and then at the floor, like a man with something lodged between his teeth he didn't know how to remove. A young couple who'd been excited by Gregory's outreach efforts avoided the coffee hour entirely. They told me, awkwardly, that they had errands. Their goodbye was quick, their smiles brittle. Gossip, of course, has teeth. It found the library stacks, the salon where Mrs. Carter gets her hair set, the bank teller who knows everyone's business. A stranger in the grocery asked me quietly, with the interest of someone reading the week's headlines, "Are you the one who?" and then flushed when my eyes registered the question. It made me thin and raw to answer. I said simply, I was here. I'm trying to help. Through it all, Martha was the compass that refused to wobble. She came to church early and sat in the second pew, her cane leaning against the kneeler. Her glasses caught the light and she would look up when someone passed, not with accusation, but with a measured, teacherly patience. Ruth kept visiting too, her arm in a sling, and some mornings she would reach for my hand across the hymn board, her grip small but urgent. We are the ones who remember, she told me once, and the words were a kind of armor. Even with allies, the circle around me tightened. Meetings that used to be open now had, for board members, only tacked to the door. Conversations that had been loud and messy in the fellowship hall became PDF minutes sent to inboxes with careful signatures. People used to bring in casseroles for a sick week suddenly had reasons. They were on the road or at a family event. The church had become a place where proximity to me adapted to fear like reeds in a wind. There were moments that cut deeper than the rumors. I would stand by the hymnals, fingering the little gold cross at my throat, and feel someone's glance settle on me like a verdict. A friend I had visited through surgeries and funerals stood at the choir loft and avoided me. When our eyes accidentally met, she looked away so quickly that for a beat I thought she might cry. Instead, she crossed her arms and mouthed, "I'm sorry." The kind of apology that holds no responsibility. Sometimes, in the quiet between services, I would hear a children's choir practicing in the adjacent room. Their voices, bright and unblinking, startled me. They sang the lines about trust as if trust had not cracked. The sound snagged and smoothed itself into the rafters. I would touch the nick on my brooch and feel the memory of Howard's hands. It steadied me enough to breathe. And in those thin pauses I also heard something else. The low, steadfast murmur of those who refused to turn away. An older couple would bring a pie and leave it at the church office with a note, "For whoever needs it." A pair of ladies from the knitting group came early to help fold bulletins silently. Diane, whose voice had broken on the line the morning of the accident, would occasionally sit in the back and stare at the exit as if rehearsing how to leave and return. She didn't speak much yet, but once as I passed, she reached out and squeezed my hand with a fierce pressure that said without words, "Thank you." Isolation had a geography, cold pews, narrower doorways, glances that slid over me. But it also revealed a map of where loyalty still lived. Quieter now perhaps, but no less real. I learned who would speak to me down a hospital corridor, who would sign a petition, who would quietly copy records and slip them into Martha's folders. There were fewer of them than before, but they had faces and names and the particular cadence of people who'd been members of this place as long as I. The town's winter wants you to choose a side. Snow makes footprints easier to see. Every step shows up black on white. Mine had become noticeable. I felt it in my shoes and I felt it in my chest. I could shrink and melt back into the pattern I'd always known. Or I could keep walking, making a trail that others could follow. So I kept showing up. I sat in the same pew. I said the prayers I had always said. I folded the bulletins when no one asked me to. I answered the questions I could. And when a hand went reaching for my shoulder, the hand of someone I had known since their baby days, I took it. Sometimes we both cried. Sometimes we did not. Sometimes we met eyes and found, in that small focus, the courage to be present to one another again. The sanctuary is full and the sound of shoes on the aisle carpet seems louder than it should. My hands are folded in my lap, thumb rubbing the small nick on my gold cross until the metal warms under my skin. Martha is 2 pews over, impossible to miss with her straight back and the way she holds her cane like a baton. Ruth sits near the front, her sling a white flag at her side. Diane is at the back, fingers worrying the edge of her hymnal like someone testing a seam. Pastor Gregory steps up to the pulpit in a suit that catches the light, too sharp against the worn wood. The smell of the pulpit is familiar. Dust and lemon polish and the faint, comforting varnish that has soaked into its grain for decades. Today that smell feels like a ledger opened. The room goes hush, a sort of suction that pulls at my breathing. His voice begins, smooth and practiced. It vibrates through the rafters, finds the hymnals, slides along the pews. There's an echo that bounces back from the balcony, like applause delayed. He talks about forgiveness and community, and the syllables hang in the air, not heavy but taut like wire. The congregation leans in. Some faces are blank, some strained. I count the tiny tells. A lip bitten here, hands pressed together there. People trying to find comfort in a sermon while the ground beneath the pulpit shifts. I keep my hands together until my knuckles blanch. I breathe slow. Inhale, hold, exhale. The rhythm steadies me, like someone whispering the Lord's Prayer under their breath. I try to stay calm. My fingers find each other and weave a small firm knot. If I move too quickly, I think I will spill the thing we have been holding. Martha's papers, the truth they hold. And this moment is thin as glass. He smiles in all the right places. He tells a story about a minister who had to make a hard choice. His voice swells, the vibration fills the room. The words are pious and polished, a varnish over wood. I watch the congregation as if I am reading the lines on a page. Some eyes shine with trust. Some eyes are flat as the river in winter. Then from the back a door opens with a long low creak, soft at first but it slices through the reverence. Cold air slips in like an intruder. The candle on the little side table trembles. Its flame droops and then snaps out with a tiny hiss, leaving a blackened wick and a sudden shadow. A hush falls harder, and for a breath the only sound is the clock over the choir loft clicking time like a judge counting down. The pastor keeps talking. He does not miss a beat. But the rhythm is off now. The echo has a jag. The sermon feels like a record someone put their finger on. I can feel the chair under me, the roughness of the pew, the weight of the cross at my throat. My lungs want to shake. Somewhere a paper flutters. An unnoticed bulletin dislodged by the draft. It skates across the aisle and knocks against the base of the altar rail. The crucifix that hangs at the front, a simple wooden one our hands have touched 1,000 times for blessing, trembles as if the world itself has taken a small step. Its chain slips. For a second it dangles, then gives a small sickening clack as it falls toward the floor. The sound makes the room flinch. The crucifix lands on the worn floorboards and tips over, sliding across the grain with an ungodly scrape. A woman near me gasps, an instant sharp as glass. My hands clamp together like a trap. The pastor's face, he hasn't looked at it yet, stiffens. The melody of his voice falters, a hairline crack you can see by the way his jaw tightens. He reaches for the hymnal and pretends to cough, like a man who is practiced at covering things that should not be covered. Martha stands up, slow as a tide. Her cane thunks against the pew in a small decisive drum. She does not shout. She doesn't have to. Her movement is a signal. People turn like flowers following a sun. I stand too because the habit of standing at attention is older in me than fear. My heart is a drum against my ribs. Pastor Gregory, Martha says, and her voice is that teacher's pitch. Clear, inevitable. We need to speak. Now. His smile retreats into a line. Martha. He keeps his tone a velvet cord, but there is a thread of steel behind it. He looks at me then, and for the first time all morning he meets my gaze and doesn't look away. His eyes are cool, and I can see the small calculation moving behind them. The pastor's words try to refill the space. Let us pray, he says, the velvet returned, but an officer's measured steps cross the foyer. He is not meant to be here, I think, and then he is, uniform dark, badge catching light like a solemn coin. He moves toward the front, and with him comes the reality we have been papering over. People smell it first. The crisp scent of winter on his jacket, the cleaner air that comes with officialdom. We are suspended between ritual and reckoning. The officer clears his throat, and it is the kind of sound that makes a preacher look small. Sir, he says to Pastor Gregory, we need to speak with you. There are questions about the bus, about funds. The words are simple. They land. They make something in the room tremble. Chairs. Martha's hand finds mine. Her fingers are warm and the pressure is like a benediction. My breath is still slow. Inhale, hold, exhale. The knot of my fingers loosens. We have let the thing be seen. The candle is out, the crucifix has fallen, the door has sighed, symbols have shifted. There is a rupture, yes, but there is also a place where light might get in. As he follows the officer to the back, people lean forward in their seats and whisper. For a second the congregation is raw and honest and very, very human. I feel the weight of every Sunday I've ever kept, the carpentry of Howard's hands, the countless small repairs that hold a house up. I feel the tremor of fear and beneath it, a steady thread that is the courage to act. Martha squeezes my hand once and releases. We did it, she says, though I hardly needed to hear it. The room holds its breath, and I realize that for all the breaking, something is being mended. The next days moved like winter thaw, slow and relentless. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and hot coffee. The police station smelled of paper and crisp coats. The town smelled of salt on the roads and a kind of watching that makes people look both guilty and afraid. Officer Ramirez called me the afternoon after the hearing. He had the patient, careful tone of a man who knows how to make bad things unfold without tearing. We followed the transfers, he said. Banks don't like empty spaces in ledgers. They flag payments to a company that doesn't have a shop, doesn't have a phone. It traces back, through a trust, to a name connected to Pastor Gregory. My mouth went dry. The little gold cross under my scarf felt suddenly heavy. I pictured the papers Martha had given me, the photocopies, the careful notes in her hand, and all the small, ugly truths they had added up to. There's more, he went on. A mechanic in Duluth remembered being asked to sign off on service he never did. The driver says the brakes felt spongy. And one of your board members handed us messages this morning. My breath stopped. That board member was Diacono Phillips, quiet, tidy, the man who used jokes like bandages. He'd been bruised in that crash. His hand had the tremor of someone with a secret. He gave us texts, Ramirez said. Directed transfers. Move it to admin, the messages said. He says he was afraid, pressured. But the messages are there. He wanted to make it right. We met at the church office under fluorescent lights that always made the varnish look weary. Phillips sat across from me like a child who had been caught with his hand in a jar. His cheek was still scabbed. He wouldn't look up when we spoke. I didn't know what else to do, he mumbled finally, his voice thin. He told me it was temporary. He said the bus would bring new life, new families. I believed him. I wanted to help his vision. There are ways to betray, and there are reasons whispered into the ear that make betrayal feel like mercy. I felt each one in his confession. I also felt the shape of it, the careful cumulative pattern that had put plastic paint on a deadly truth. The evidence built itself like a house on shaky pilings. The bank traced the wire. The deed showed a company address that led to a mailbox. The mechanic's affidavit said he never signed off on the brake work. Officers pulled service logs and found holes like missing teeth. Phillips's texts named dates and amounts. None of it was miraculous. It was ink and numbers and human fear, the things that add up when someone chooses their ambition over the lives in their hands. They brought Pastor Gregory in for further questioning. He sat under the harsh light, tidy suit resisting the room's gravity. For a long moment he said nothing. He smiled in that way that had once calmed a room. Then his facade thinned. He tried to explain projects, outreach, a plan that in his mind justified shortcuts. I thought, if we could expand, if we could bring more people in, they'd see what I see, he said at last, voice low. I thought I was doing God's work. Those words slid across the table. They were not a prayer, not a confession. They were a rationalization wrapped in good intentions. I felt the old ache, how easy it is to mistake zeal for righteousness, How quickly vision can eclipse duty. I could have screamed then. I could have told him about Ruth's arm, about Diane's white face in the ambulance, about the weight of fear in people's hands as they held a hymnal. Instead, I found myself remembering Howard's hands on the annex beam. Steady, precise, caring for wood so it would hold. I pressed my thumb into the nick in the brooch until it hurt. Do you understand what that means? I asked quietly. Not for you, for them. For us. He looked at me then and something like the old practice charm cracked. Not repentance. Not even shame that reached the bone. But the calculation faltered. He swallowed. The council supported me, he said. I didn't have to do it alone. It was a confession that laid the complicity out like a map. It was also a doorway. That doorway opened when people we had expected to defend him did the only thing braver than denial. They told the truth. Diacono Phillips handed over what he had. A city official who'd been photographed with Gregory came forward with bank statements that cleared the ledger. One by one the small, patient pieces fit into the outline Martha had shown me months before. There was no triumphant shout. There was no heavenly trumpet. Evidence is a quieter God. It arrives with a clerk's signature and a typed subpoena and the low, steady work of people deciding they will not look away anymore. The congregation fractured, as congregations do when trust breaks. Some left, anger a warm thing to hang on to. Some stayed and demanded change. There were board meetings where voices rose and arms were crossed, and the air tasted like coffee gone cold. There were moments I wanted to run and hide in the part of the building where the wood still smelled like Howard's sweat and sawdust. But there were also small returns. Ruth came to a meeting and read aloud the names of those who had brought casseroles after the accident. Diane, whose voice had faltered on the morning line, read a prayer she had written in the back of a hospital waiting room. People began, haltingly, almost apologetically, to clean what had been soiled: minutes, policies, ledgers. They learned words like audit and oversight in the small practical way you learn to mend a broken pane. Patiently, with glue and a careful hand. One evening after everything had been stamped and filed and the officers had taken statements, I stood in the sanctuary. The crucifix was back on its chain. The candle on the side table burned steady. Sunlight, weak and late, slid through the stained glass and warmed the dust. Martha came in and sat beside me. Her folder was thinner now. Her hands were steady. She smelled of peppermint and the polish she'd used on the brass trays. She laced our fingers together the way she'd held a ruler in a classroom, with the exacting, quiet certainty of someone who understands that order keeps us safe. We did what we had to, she said. No triumph. Just fact. I thought of the whisper that morning. The small breath of warning that had lived in Martha's voice. I thought of the bus, of the shuddering stop at the hospital, and of every small thing that, when added together, had kept worse from happening. Faith, I realized, is not only worship and song. Faith is also tending like Howard tended the wood. It is making sure the beams won't rot, because someone wanted a faster finish. It is the courage to ask questions. It is the stubbornness to keep the books clean. Outside, the snow on the church steps began to slough away in thin, patient strips. People who had been absent came back slowly, like returning birds. Their faces were not unmarked, but they were present. I sat with my cross warm against my chest and whispered, as I had in the ambulance months before, "Sometimes God speaks through those who love." Martha squeezed my hand. For the first time in many Sundays that felt like enough. The sanctuary feels smaller now, not in a mean way, but as if the room itself has been pared back to what matters. The hymnals sit in neat rows, their edges softened by years of thumbs. A single pew near the back is empty, the one Ruth used to choose when her knees were kinder. It looks wrong and honest at the same time, like an exposed beam where you can see the grain. I cross the carpet slowly. My shoes whisper. The sound sits in the air longer than it used to. My hand goes to the little gold cross at my collar. Howard's nick digs into my thumb like a reminder. The metal is warm from my skin. I breathe in. The church smells of lemon polish and old wood and the faint sweet twist of peppermint from Martha's purse. Those scents are small instruments. We changed the way we did things. We created committees and oversight. The bus that had been bought with false signatures is parked now, its paint dulled by winter. Stands like a thing being examined. There are new drivers who sign forms and ask questions. There are maintenance logs with stamps you can trust. The shift wasn't dramatic. No trumpet from the rafters, but it was steady like a hand relaying a joist. Some members left, and I still feel the loss as a hollow in the choir loft. But voices returned, too, children's voices at first, bright and careless, then more adults who came back because they believed in mending. They returned because they loved a place that had once warmed them, and because they could see us trying. They came with casseroles and with questions, with apologies and with willingness to learn new tools for stewardship. Martha is as steady as ever. The folder she carried that morning is thinner now, its edges softer from being read. She sits in the second pew and taps her cane like a metronome when she hears a sermon too long. She still perfumes her hands with peppermint. Her glasses catch the light in a way that says she is looking for truth, and will not be satisfied until she finds it. We have grown into something like a partnership, her ledger and my stubbornness. Together we've put together a list of names, of people to call, of tasks that need hands. There are mornings when the sanctuary is quiet except for the radiator's soft groan. Those are the mornings I come early and fold bulletins the way I used to. My hands know the rhythm. It is a thing small and sacramental. I tuck one side under the other, crease it neat. The simple motion steadies me in the way Howard's hammer used to steady a loose rail. I put the bulletins in the basket and leave the front of the church tidy, because there is dignity in that small care. Sometimes when the light through the stained glass hits the dust in a certain way, I can see the dust motes like tiny suspended prayers. The light warms them and for a moment they hang perfectly. I stand there and I am tired and grateful and very old in a way that has nothing to do with bones and everything to do with memory. The crucifix has been rehung. The candle on the side table burns steady. Someone polished the brass offering trays and left them shining like a promise. I still think of that morning. The hiss of the tires, Diane's voice cut short on the phone, the way Martha's whisper landed like a stone. I still feel the shock of seeing a group of people you love in a hospital ward. But the memory is tempered now by what came after. The slow, stubborn work of naming what was wrong and setting it right. That work is not glamorous. It is paperwork in meetings and holding hands in waiting rooms. It is forgiveness, sometimes given, sometimes withheld, and almost always rebuilt slowly. There are evenings when I sit in the empty church and listen. The house is patient. The pews remember me by shape. On those nights a sound comes that is so ordinary it might be sacred. Footsteps in the hallway as someone leaves, a coat brushing the door, the soft close of a hinge. The sound marks an ending and a beginning all at once. I have heard it 100 times now, the shuffle of soles, the murmur of a goodbye, the slow creak of the outer door. Tonight the last person has gone. I stand by the door and watch their footsteps disappear down the walk, and then stop. The wind lifts and a stray bulletin flutters like a white bird. It skates across the threshold and rests near the stoop. For a second everything holds its breath. A gust comes, and the door moves as if someone has given it a benediction. The wind closing the door is not violent. It is gentle and final. It is like the turning of a page. The click is soft, ordinary, absolute. I press my palm to the wood where the door fits. The grain is worn smooth. My hand is older. My thumb finds the nick on the cross at my collar. I breathe out. There is an ache that will not leave me. Memory is a long companion. But there is also a small light. The pews will fill again. The bus will run on schedules and papers will be stamped and a choir will relearn harmonies. It will not be the same as before. It will be different, honest in the ways that matter now. I turn from the door and walk down the aisle. My steps echo. The floor remembers Howard's boots. I pause at the empty bench and lay my hand on it, as if touching wood could stitch the place whole. The house is quiet, but it is not empty. Outside, the wind lifts one last loose page and sends it skittering down the path. The footsteps fade. The door closes with a small, ordinary click, and it sounds to me like a benediction. The days after the arrests were not cinematic. There were no choir crescendos, no miracle returns. Mostly there were meetings that smelled of stale coffee and paper. I sat at long tables under fluorescent lights and tried to remember which pen I preferred. The ledger Martha had shown me became a map everyone had to learn to read. We sat with auditors and lawyers and men in plain coats who asked steady questions. They asked about dates. They asked about signatures. They tapped at keyboards with the same patient insistence that Martha had used to tap a pencil on a table. It all felt sacred in a different way. Not the hush of a sanctuary, but the careful, exacting hush of people trying to set things right. Some mornings I still woke with the weight of that hospital ward in my chest. I would reach for the little gold cross like a compass. Howard's nick fit my thumb the same way it always had, and for a moment the world felt square again. Then the day would begin, calls, lists, the small kindnesses that stitch a life back together. Ruth came to more meetings, her sling a pale flag. Diane began to volunteer at the food pantry, moving slow at first and then with a fierce steadiness that surprised us all. Philip sat at a table one afternoon and read out an accounting of what he had done. His voice was small, layered with apology. It landed like a stone and made concentric rings. We learned new words. Audit. Oversight. Conflict of interest. They sounded clinical and I had to breathe them in until they felt like prayers. We put policies in place that would not allow a single ledger line to go unexamined. We signed forms and passed them around like hope. The bus that had once been a gleaming promise sat in the lot, its paint dulled by the weather and a new kind of scrutiny. Its keys were kept in a lockbox. Its maintenance log had more stamps than before. Someone joked in a small way that even our rubber tires had better paperwork now. There were losses. People left. Not only the man who had betrayed us, but parishioners who could not endure the rooms where whispers still echoed. Hot anger is easier to hold than slow repair. Some of the casseroles stopped coming. The choir had fewer sopranos. The fellowship hall felt larger and thinner. And yet, in the margins of absence, small returns began. A family came back with a pie and a note that read simply, "We want to help." An older man who had not spoken in weeks asked to read a passage at a meeting. A child returned to Sunday school, eyes bright, asking the kind of question that makes adults realize how much they have simplified their answers. Martha became impossibly more herself. She organized committees the way she had once organized bake sales, with a clipboard, a calendar, and a particular fierceness that made the timid feel safe. She taught younger members how to read a bank statement the way she had once taught them how to fold a bulletin. I watched her move through the church with that teacher's posture, and I felt pride and something like awe that someone of her years could hold so many things steady. The crucifix that had fallen that day was rehung with careful hands. The candle burns in the side table again, steady as a heartbeat. Once in a while I stand before the altar and listen to the sound of the wood settling, the same sound Howard used to hear when he worked on the annex. It is a small reassurance. That wood can bear weight if tended, that a house of worship is not only sermon but safekeeping. Sometimes I think about the look on Pastor Gregory's face when the officers called him aside. It was not a look I had seen before. Not quite anger, not quite shame. It was an arithmetic of regret. People like to make monsters of betrayers, to imagine they had no doubts. But I remember the way he tried, clumsily, to explain a vision that had slid its banks. It made me think about how easy it is to confuse zeal with stewardship, and how much courage it takes to let oversight temper ambition. I am older now. My hands are not as steady as they once were. I still wear my brooch. I rub Howard's nick when my fingers need a quiet. I still go early to fold bulletins. It steadies me. It is small work. It is the kind of faithful tending that does not make headlines, but it keeps a place livable. People ask me sometimes if I lost my faith in the process. They mean my faith in God. At night, when the church empties and the last hymnal is returned to its slot, I stand by the door and feel the draft close like a page. The floor remembers Howard's boots. The scent of lemon polish lingers in the air, threaded now with peppermint from Martha's purse. The bus waits out front, not a symbol of triumph but a thing under watchful eyes. The town is smaller in winter, but footprints show the way back. People who left return with patched apologies, with casseroles, with questions. They come because repairing a house does not mean sealing it off. It means learning the tools to keep it sound. I think about the whisper that changed everything. How small it was. How human. How adequate. Martha's breath against my ear was a tiny thing that reached across years of trust and said simply, "Not today." It saved lives because it asked a question. It taught me that sometimes the most faithful act is not a shout from the pulpit but the stubborn, quiet decision to look. Sometimes the whisper saves more than the sermon. If you've made it this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. If you feel it in your heart, please subscribe so you won't miss the next stories, and keep walking with me by watching the other videos I've prepared with care. And please, share in the comments what you thought of my testimony. I will read every word.